The applause never lands. It hovers there half-born, jittering inside a glass box high above Market Street, when Richard Vale raises his hand with the same calm a surgeon uses to halt a beating heart. Mara Ellison stands at the head of the table, pointer aimed at a wall of metrics gliding into perfect alignment. 6 months of sleep debt has a shape, the green line she coaxed into staying flat under pressure, a number so clean even the investors on the wall of monitors have stopped blinking. She's already imagining the email she'll send her daughter, early dinner, I promise, when Richard's fingers spread like a stop sign. Thank you, Mara, he says, his voice microphone smooth. He glances up at the digital clock above the glass doors. 9:12 a.m. The numbers change with a click that sounds to Mara like a trigger pulled from far away. Effective immediately, he adds, your employment with Crumble Tech is terminated. No one coughs. The projector hums. Someone's pen skitters and hits the floor. On the big screen, Mara's dashboard winks out and is replaced by a sterile white overlay stamped with a single phrase. Termination confirmed. Ben Cho, the junior analyst whose hoodie never quite fits the dress code, whispers, oh my God, and reaches blind for the pen that just abandoned him. The HR director, Janet Lyle, goes pale as she slides a manila folder across the table with both hands like she's offering up a truce flag. Beside her, CTO Eli Turner's jaw tightens, then loosens, then tightens again. He watches Richard the way a man watches a storm decide which block to level. This is a misunderstanding, one of the New York investors says through the speakers, startled like the building itself just hiccuped. His window fills a corner of the wall, a man in a navy suit, the skyline behind him slashed by cranes. During the demo, Richard doesn't look at him. He keeps his eyes on Mara. Not a misunderstanding, he says almost kindly. A realignment. Mara doesn't speak. If she opens her mouth, she isn't sure what will come out. Data, a curse, a laugh. She thinks of the hotel coffee at 3 a.m., the code that finally behaved, the quick text to Ella with a selfie of her and the blinking server lights. 2 more hours, kiddo. Then home. She thinks of last winter, when Richard asked her to stay through the windstorm, and she stayed, and her father died in Ohio without her hand in his. She hadn't forgiven herself. She suspects Richard had counted on that. Janet's fingers tremble. You can take all the time you need to review the... I won't be signing anything in this room, Mara says, surprised at how steady she sounds. She closes the manila folder and the sound is louder than it should be, a clean little snap that makes 2 people flinch. Richard's smile widens a fraction, camera. No need for theatrics. We appreciate your contributions, Mara meets his eye. Under the smooth delivery she sees it, something coiled and hungry. It's the same thing she's seen in conference rooms from Austin to Seattle, the thing that ruins good people and feeds on applause. Control. He's not firing her to save money. He's firing her to make the story true. The platform belongs to him, the room belongs to him, and even her exit is a line of dialogue he wrote. The monitors along the wall show an array of muted observations. An investor in Chicago blinking, another in Midtown leaning toward his camera, a third looking down to type. Somewhere far below, a bus hisses at the curb. Up here, time stalls. 9:12 becomes a cliff they're all standing on. Eli clears his throat like it hurts. We can do this after the demo, he says quietly to Richard. Optics are precisely why, Richard replies and doesn't lower his voice. Leadership means clarity under pressure, leadership. Clarity. Words you can polish until they reflect back exactly what you want to see. Mara unhooks her laptop from the cable, slides the leather notebook on top of it and straightens. She doesn't look at the investors. She doesn't look at Janet's careful pity or Ben's blown wide eyes. She doesn't give Richard the fight he's baiting her into. She walks to the glass door, opens it, and steps into the hallway where the carpet swallows sound. When the door falls shut behind her, the room's reflection shrinks to a rectangle, a small aquarium full of people who haven't realized yet that they're out of air. At the elevator, she presses down and watches her face tired, stubborn ghost across the mirrored steel. When the doors open, she imagines saying the one thing that hovers on her tongue like a dare. You can't fire the heartbeat and expect the body to keep pretending. Instead, she rides to the lobby, walks out into the slapped blue morning, and crosses to the cafe with the picture window that stares straight into Crumble Tech's 22nd floor. She orders a black coffee and opens the notebook. On the first clean page, she writes 9:12 a.m. Oh, they cut the wire. Then she underlines it twice as if to make the moment hold. Mara sat at the cafe's corner table, where sunlight slipped through the blinds like measured code across a screen. The smell of burnt espresso mixed with rain-soaked concrete wafting from the street. She'd chosen this spot for its view, direct line of sight to Crumbletech's glass facade on the 22nd floor. Her old office. She stirred her coffee, though she'd ordered it black. The spoon clinked against the porcelain, steady, rhythmic. Control in miniature. Her hand still trembled, but only slightly. Numbness was setting in, the strange, clinical calm that came after disaster. She'd seen it before in data center failures and system crashes, when engineers froze before realizing what had happened. But this was different. This time she was the system. The cafe door chimed. A couple of young consultants entered, their lanyards swinging, laughter spilling out like cheap champagne. They dropped their laptops on a table behind her, already deep in a conversation about performance metrics and cost-saving initiatives, the same corporate dialect that had just amputated her life. "Hey, you good?" the barista asked softly, sliding her a napkin she hadn't asked for. The girl was maybe 20, with a lip ring and the kind of gentle concern that didn't require words. Mara nodded. "Oh yeah? Just a long morning," the barista smiled, but her eyes lingered. "You from across the street?" Mara hesitated, then lied without conviction. "Used to be." The girl's lips parted as if to ask more, but the espresso machine shrieked and pulled her away. Mara flipped open her leather notebook. The pages were lined with dates, times, fragments of ideas. A system is only as ethical as its architect. A note she'd scribbled months ago stared back at her like prophecy. She exhaled slowly, and her mind returned to the boardroom. Richard smirk. The silence that swallowed her voice before she could even decide to use it. 17 years. She detrained dozens of people, written code that powered hospitals, airports, banks. Yet a single gesture from a man who'd never touched a command line erased her in seconds. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost ignored it but pressed accept on reflex. "OMS. Ellison," a male voice said, smooth but cautious. "This is Victor Han from Legal. We'd like to schedule an exit interview this afternoon just to finalize." Finalize? Mara's voice was calm, almost curious. "You fire someone in front of the investors and now you want an exit interview? I understand this is emotional," Victor said, his corporate empathy hitting every rehearsed syllable. "But per policy, it's standard procedure. Tell Richard Vale he's not done yet," Mara said quietly, then ended the call before he could answer. Her reflection in the cafe window flickered against the mirrored tower outside. Somewhere on the 22nd floor, chaos would be starting to ripple. She didn't need to see it to know. The audit window, her design, was opening right on schedule. She smiled barely. "Let's see if they can run the machine without its architect." The barista glanced over at her, startled by the whisper. But Mara was already closing her notebook, the corners worn from years of midnight troubleshooting sessions. The silence she had left behind in that glass conference room was no accident, it was a seed. And seeds, given pressure and time, always find their way to the surface. At 9:46 a.m., the first pulse hit. Mara didn't need to see it, she felt it. Like a tug in her chest, a rhythm out of sync with the city's heartbeat. She looked up from her coffee, past the glass, toward the 22nd floor of Crumbletech. From this distance, the mirrored facade made it impossible to see faces, but she could imagine them, every executive, every analyst, sitting in a panic they didn't yet have words for. Inside that conference room, a soft chime had interrupted the silence. The massive display screen flickered once, twice, then stopped on a blinking message. Audit confirmation required. Lead architect's signature pending. At first, no one moved. The junior analyst, Ben Cho, was the first to notice the anomaly. He pointed at the text, his voice a whisper. Sir, I think it's asking for her." Her, Richard Vale's tone sliced through the room. "The system wants Mara Ellison's verification key," Ben said, his fingers already hovering over the keyboard. "It's the final audit sequence, the one that authenticates the launch. We can't bypass it without her encryption token." Richard's jaw tightened. "Don't be ridiculous. We paid for this code. We own it." Eli Turner, the CTO, shifted in his chair. "Ownership doesn't matter. The architecture was hard-coded for personal verification." You signed off on that 6 months ago when you approved her security proposal. Richard turned to him, eyes narrowing. You're telling me the system we just rolled out on a live investor call depends on a single employee who no longer works here? Eli hesitated. Not depends, but it recognizes her as the original architect. Without her signature, the audit window won't close. It's a safety lock, not sabotage. Then unlock it, Richard snapped. I can't, Eli's voice dropped lower. It's tied to her biometric key. Face and voice match only. A tense silence fell over the room. On the live feed, one of the investors leaned toward his webcam. Is that part of the presentation? He asked flatly. Richard forced a laugh that didn't sound human. Of course, a simulation of our internal redundancy protocols. Proof that we can identify gaps instantly. Ben glanced at him, uncertain. Should I abort the process? No, Richard barked. Run it again, Ben obeyed, his fingers trembling over the keys. The system blinked, then flashed the message again in sharper contrast, letters pulsing white against black. Authentication required, MARAELLISON. Richard's voice lowered to a growl. Vex. From across the street, Mara could almost see his mouth form those words. She smiled faintly, the expression soft and bitter all at once. She pulled out her pen and wrote in her notebook, 9:46 a.m. A first pulse. They're starting to sweat. Her phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number, Victor Han Legal MS. Ellison, we're experiencing a minor technical issue. Are you available for a quick consultation? Compensation will be arranged. Mara took a slow sip of coffee, letting the bitterness sit on her tongue. Then she typed a single line and hit send. Mara, you fired your consultant at 9:12. You don't get her at 9:46. She set the phone face down. For the first time in 17 years, she wasn't the one chasing emergencies. Through the glass, she could sense the panic spreading, emails firing, calls being made, Richard's voice tightening into command mode. She felt no triumph, only the strange calm that comes after a long, slow betrayal. The system she built was pulsing like a heart demanding acknowledgement, and Richard was about to learn that arrogance doesn't overwrite design. Mara leaned back, staring at the tout. Your move, she murmured. Inside Crumbletech's gleaming conference room, the tension was suffocating. The air conditioning hummed louder than the people. The blinking message on the central screen, authentication required, Mara Ellison, pulsed like a heartbeat, a silent accusation that no one could escape. Eli Turner, the CTO, cleared his throat, but his voice still came out strained. Richard, I've seen this protocol before. It's not a malfunction, it's the architecture itself. The system was built to prevent unauthorized overrides during audits. Without Mara's key, it'll keep escalating. Richard Vale leaned back in his chair, twirling a pen between his fingers like a conductor to chaos. His expression was cool, but the veins at his temple gave him away. You're overreacting. The system is fine. It's just stuck in a redundant loop. Eli shook his head. This isn't a loop. It's the failsafe, she wrote. If you try to bypass it, the system will assume a breach and initiate lockdown. It was meant to protect our data integrity. You insisted on the feature after the New York breach. I insisted, Richard said, his smile tightening, because I believed my team could manage it. He leaned forward, voice dipping to a threat. And right now, Eli, I need you to manage it. Across the room, Ben Cho shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Sir, maybe we should remember who's in charge, Richard snapped, pointing the pen toward him like a weapon. You're an analyst, not an architect. Don't start offering strategy. Ben's face went red as he lowered his gaze to the table. The room felt smaller now, the tension compressing every breath. Eli took a slow one of his own before speaking again. Richard, I'm warning you, the audit protocol can't be overridden without authentications. We could lock out the entire network if we try. Richard's smirk deepened, but his eyes had gone sharp. You think I don't understand how this company runs? I think you've forgotten that systems don't answer to ego, Eli said evenly. They answer to logic, the words landed like a slap. For a moment, the only sound was the steady hum of the projector. Richard set the pen down carefully. His calm returned, but it was the brittle kind, the kind that cracked under heat. Here's what you're going to do, he said, voice low. You'll write a patch to override the signature request. You'll attach it to my admin key and push it lives. I want that warning gone before the investors start asking real questions. That's not a patch, Eli replied. That's suicide, Richard's gaze turned to glass. Then die with it, Eli. But fix the damn problem. At that, Eli looked toward the screen again, watching the pulsing text MARAELLISON flicker like a ghost that refused to be erased. He swallowed hard. Fine. I'll start drafting the override, he said quietly. Richard turned to the investors still on the video wall, smoothing his tie as if nothing had happened. Just a minor debugging hiccup, he said with forced cheer. Our CTO is already handling it. Across the street in the cafe, Mara Ellison could almost hear his tone, syruped with corporate confidence. She opened her notebook and wrote in neat, deliberate script, 9:52 a.m. Eli warned him. He didn't listen. Then she underlined the words twice, her pen pressing deep into the paper. She didn't smile this time. She felt something colder, a kind of pity. Richard Vale wasn't fighting a system anymore. He was fighting the truth. And that's the one enemy that never loses. At 9:58 a.m., the second pulse hit. The conference room lights flickered once, then steadied. The main display darkened and replaced itself with a black screen streaked by a single red line that pulsed like an EKG. Then white letters appeared across the glass wall, sharp as a verdict. Last verification attempt. Lead architect signature required. Countdown initiated. 5:00:459:458. Ben Cho flinched at the soundless clock ticking down the corner of the screen. It's starting a full system audit, he whispered. If it expires without validation, the core encryptions will. Don't finish that sentence, Richard Vale snapped. He stood, palms pressed flat on the glossy table. We are not shutting down a $780 million system because of a 5-minute timer written by a disgruntled employee. She's not disgruntled, Eli Turner said quietly. She's brilliant. And she saw this coming. Richard shot him a glare that could have cracked glass. She's irrelevant. Across the street, Mara Ellison sat at the cafe's window, the same black coffee gone cold beside her. Her notebook lay open to a fresh page. She didn't need the internal system feed to know what was happening. The countdown protocol she designed was predictable, merciless, and immune to bluff. She wrote with deliberate strokes, 9:58 a.m. A second pulse. Countdown engaged. She closed her eyes for a second and saw them all in her mind's eye, their frantic eyes, Richard's forced grin, Eli's quiet dread. She could almost hear the rhythmic beeping of that unseen clock echoing through the boardroom. Back inside Crumble Tech, chaos had finally pierced Richard's composure. He barked orders to Ben, who was pale and shaking. Reboot the dashboard manually. It's not responding, Ben said. The system's locked us out. It's running on self-audit mode. Override it. I can't override something that's locked at the root, Ben's voice cracked. Only the architect can do that. Enough, Richard's fist slammed against the table. A few investors flinched on their live screens. This is theater. She built this drama to scare us, and I won't let her win. Eli leaned forward, voice low but steady. This isn't about winning. The system doesn't feel. It doesn't negotiate. You asked her to build something incorruptible, remember? This is what that looks like. Then we corrupt it, Richard said. I don't care how, Ben's eyes darted from one man to the other. Sir, the investors are asking for status updates. They're recording this meeting. Richard smoothed his tie, instantly recalibrating his tone. Tell them it's an internal test. Confidence, people. Optics are everything. But as he turned to face the cameras again, the red pulse behind him flashed brighter, faster. The countdown was nearing 4 minutes. Across the street, Myra's phone buzzed again, another call from legal, then one from HR. She ignored both. She wasn't ready to intervene. Not yet. She flipped her pen between her fingers, watching the tower like a chess player who'd already seen the board 10 moves ahead. The silence between the cafe's jazz music and the city noise felt surreal, too peaceful for what she knew was unfolding above. Inside that conference room, panic was now leaking through every polished surface. Eli's voice was the only one that stayed calm. If the timer hits 0, the system isolates itself. You'll lose full access, servers, backups, everything. Richard straightened his cuffs, feigning calm. Then we'll fix it afterward, Eli shook his head slowly. You won't be able to. Not without her. Richard's smile froze for half a beat before he turned toward the display. There's always a way around arrogance, he said. Eli looked at him with quiet pity. That's what she thought when she trusted you. At 9:59:12, the screen's pulse quickened. 4003:59:358. The soundless countdown continued to bleed red into the sterile conference room light, each second slicing closer to the point of no return. Across the street, Mara's pen hovered over the notebook. Her expression was unreadable. She wrote one line, then underlined it. It begins. The countdown crawled toward 2 minutes when Richard Vale made his move. Step aside, he said, brushing past Eli and Ben toward the console at the center of the room. His voice was steady again, his old performance tone, the one investors once called presidential. He straightened his suit jacket, glanced briefly at the cameras still broadcasting live, and smiled. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're witnessing is the difference between theory and leadership. He placed both hands on the keyboard and began typing. Each keystroke echoed like a gunshot against glass. Lines of code spilled across the massive screen, green letters devouring the red countdown. Ben froze. Sir, that's the master override. We've never tested it. Richard didn't look up. Then today's your lucky day. Eli took a step forward. Richard, stop. The override was meant as an emergency failsafe. It could cause a cascade error if you force it during a live audit. Richard's smile thinned. I'm not forcing it. I'm fixing it. That's what leaders do when everyone else panics. The investors on the live feed leaned closer to their cameras. Someone in New York whispered, "Is this still part of the demo?" Another voice, Chicago, maybe answered, "He's insane." Inside the cafe across the street, Mara Ellison watched the faint flicker of the lights from the 22nd floor. She didn't need to see his face to know that Richard was performing, not leading. Her notebook lay open beside her coffee, the ink on the last line still wet. 9:59:18 Vale overrides. Ego takes the keyboard. Back inside the boardroom, the screen suddenly shifted from red to green. The countdown vanished. System metrics realigned, pulsing smooth and steady. A collective breath filled the room. Ben let out a shaky laugh. It worked. Richard turned toward the cameras, arms spread in theatrical triumph. You see, a control. You don't get that from paranoia or emotion. You get it from confidence. Eli said nothing. His eyes stayed on the screen where the green looked too perfect, too instant, like paint covering rot. Across the street, Mara closed her notebook slowly. False hope, she murmured, writing the words in clean script before shutting it again. Richard Vale had just crowned himself savior of the system. He didn't realize the code he'd just overwritten wasn't erasing the warning. It was waking something deeper. And in less than 5 minutes, Crumbletech's empire would find out what happens when you mistake arrogance for control. For 60 seconds, the boardroom basked in the illusion of calm. The screens glowed a serene green. Investors exhaled audibly through their video feeds, murmuring about stability and resilience. Even Ben Cho cracked a nervous smile, the kind that comes when fear begins to dissolve into premature relief. Richard Vale thrived on that moment. He turned from the console, arms spread wide like a preacher addressing his flock. You see, he said smoothly. Leadership is about courage under pressure. Control the narrative and you control the outcome. A ripple of polite laughter followed from the executives in the room, forced, brittle. Eli Turner didn't laugh. He just stared at the main display, watching as the metrics settled a little too perfectly. The system wasn't stabilizing, it was waiting. He leaned forward, whispering, Richard, look at the latency readouts. What about them? They're flatlining. The system's not processing. It's mimicking. Before Richard could answer, the green screen flickered once, subtle, like the blink of a dying light bulb, then again, harder this time. The room fell silent as the monitors dimmed and then went completely black. For half a breath, there was only the hum of the air vents. Then white text cut through the darkness like a knife. You have chosen greed over trust. Access permanently revoked, Ben gasped. Oh my God, Eli rose to his feet. It's locking us out. Run the patch again, Richard barked, lunging toward the console. It won't matter, Eli said, his voice firm now, louder than it had been all morning. You tripped the failsafe. The entire system is sealing itself off, no admin rights, no recovery access. Richard's face drained of color. That's impossible, not for her, Eli said. Across the street, Mara Ellison sipped what was left of her cold coffee. Through the glass, she could see the faint flicker of screens, then darkness. She didn't smile. She just wrote one line in her notebook, 10:04 a.m. A system collapse. Message delivered. Inside Crumbletech, panic erupted. Investors began shouting over one another through the speakers. One voice cut through the chaos. Did that message say permanently? Richard stood frozen at the console, his reflection flickering in the black screen that now mirrored his disbelief. Eli looked at him and said quietly, "Congratulations, Richard. You finally controlled the narratives." He turned away as Richard's voice cracked, shouting orders no one could follow. Across the street, Mara closed her notebook. The faint echo of her own words filled her mind. You can't fire the heartbeat and expect the body to keep pretending. The body was finally collapsing. The silence inside Crumbletech didn't last. Within seconds, it fractured into chaos. Phones started buzzing like hornets. Notifications lit up every executive's screen. On the investor wall, cameras blinked as voices overlapped in outrage. "What the hell just happened?" one shouted from New York. "Is this a breach?" another barked. A woman's voice, crisp and cold, cut through them all. "Do you realize we're streaming this live?" The words froze Richard Vale mid-sentence. He turned toward the massive display behind him, now a mirror of his own face reflected against the white text burning across every feed. "Access permanently revoked." The phrase pulsed again, then replicated, spreading through every connected monitor in the room like an infection. One by one, devices began going dark, laptops, tablets, even the investors' remote screens. It was like watching an empire unplug itself. Ben Cho was the first to break. "Sir, this isn't isolated. The video feed has been clipped, edited, and oh god, it's already online." Richard snapped around. "What?" Ben's trembling hands hovered above his tablet. "It's on X. And Reddit. There's a clip. Someone recorded the meeting." A new voice filled the conference room, tinny, coming from a nearby phone left on speaker. It was an investor, furious. "Vale, your audit test is tanking your stock in real time. We just lost 7% in 8 minutes. Eli Turner looked down at his phone, the color draining from his face. "It's worse than that," he muttered. "They're replaying the clip of you saying, 'We control the system, not her.' It's gone viral." Richard blinked, his mind refusing to process it. "Viral as in what memes?" Ben didn't answer. The sound of notifications became a low thunder. The humiliation he had engineered for Mara Ellison was now his own, streamed, dissected, laughed at by millions. Across the street in the cafe, Mara watched the faint flashes through the window, the reflection of her former tower strobing like an emergency beacon. Her phone buzzed with news alerts. Crumbletech CEO fails live demo. Market reels. She didn't smile, not really. She just let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The world was watching Richard Vale unravel, but for her this wasn't revenge, it was relief. Still, she felt something heavy behind that relief. 17 years of her life had just disintegrated along with his empire. It was justice, yes, but also grief, quiet and undeniable. She wrote one last line in her notebook, 10:08 a.m. The tower begins to fall. Outside, the sunlight caught the glass of Crumbletech's facade. For a brief moment, it shimmered, not like victory, but like the final breath before collapse. By 10:15 a.m., Mara's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The first call came from HR. Then another from legal. Then 3 from numbers she didn't recognize but knew by instinct belonged to the 22nd floor. She let each one ring out, the vibration humming across the wooden cafe table like a trapped insect. Finally, a voicemail notification blinked on the screen. She didn't play it. Instead, she sipped her coffee and stared at Crumbletech's tower, its mirrored glass now reflecting clouds that moved faster than they had an hour ago. The second wave of calls came minutes later, this time frantic, insistent. The barista glanced at her, concern flickering across her face. "You okay, ma'am? You've been sitting there a while." Mara offered a small smile. "I'm fine. Just letting something finish breaking." The girl nodded slowly, unsure what that meant, and drifted away. Her phone buzzed again, unknown number. She almost ignored it until she saw the preview line, "Victor Han Legal, please MS. Ellison. We can negotiate, curiosity or maybe habit 1. She answered. "MS. Ellison." Victor's voice came through taut, rehearsed, but cracking around the edges. We're facing a technical situation that requires your immediate assistance. The board has authorized what? Mara cut in. To pretend none of this happened, to make it right, he said. We can reinstate your position temporarily. Full pay plus a reinstatement bonus. We just need your Mikey, she asked softly. The same one Richard Vale said he owned. There was a pause, then the sound of him exhaling. Amara, please. If the audit isn't cleared by noon, the system might trigger a full data lockdown. That's hundreds of millions in losses. Thousands of employees? You mean the same employees who watched me get humiliated on live feed? Victor hesitated. We were following orders, that's the problem, she said. Everyone there always was. She hung up before he could respond. Her pulse was steady now. The panic that once defined her days at Crumbletech had evaporated. Minutes later, another call came through. This time, the name glowing on the screen made her breath hitch for the first time all morning. Richard Vale. She let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then his message popped up. Only you can save us. Mara stared at it for a long time. Not in triumph, but in quiet disbelief. The man who had spent years teaching her that people were replaceable had finally learned what it felt like not to be. She didn't delete the message. She just wrote in her notebook, 10:15 a.m. Oh, they start begging. Then for the first time that day, she allowed herself a small, exhausted laugh, half victory, half release. By 10:30 a.m., Mara's phone had turned into an orchestra of desperation. Emails flooded in, subject lines screaming urgent, immediate assistance required, board authorization attached. A dozen new voicemails blinked at her from legal, HR, even Eli Turner, who had once told her in private that her code was too idealistic for the real world. Now, apparently, her ideals were the only thing keeping their real world from burning down. She watched the notifications pile up and said nothing. Silence, she realized, was a language they had never learned to read. Another buzz. Richard Vale. This time he was calling live. Mara's thumb hovered over the accept button. A single press could end it, end the panic, end the humiliation, maybe even give her back the career they'd stolen. She could name her price, demand control, rewrite the narrative. Isn't that what power is, she thought. The part of her that had spent 17 years chasing respect whispered, pick up. Make him beg. But another voice rose from deeper inside, the one that still remembered her daughter's disappointed eyes every time Mara had said, I'll make it next year. The phone buzzed again, rattling against the coffee cup. She pictured Richard in that glass conference room, his confidence shredded, his voice breaking as he called the woman he'd dismissed like a line item. She picked up but didn't speak. Mara, his voice was rough, desperate. Please, we can fix this together. You know I've always respected me, she finished. That's what you're going to say. I made mistakes, Richard stammered. But this company, your work, it can't survive without you. She let the silence stretch. Then she said, calm and flat, you should have thought of that before turning me into a show for your investors. Mara, please. We'll reinstate you as chief architect. Triple salary. Board position. Just no, she said. You don't get to buy conscience with compensation. He started to reply, but she ended the call mid-word. Her reflection in the cafe window stared back, tired, defiant. For the first time in years, she wasn't the one kneeling under corporate pressure. She didn't feel rage. She didn't feel triumph. She just felt done. Mara set her phone face down on the table and whispered to herself, no more trading pieces of myself for power. Then she opened her notebook and wrote her next line, 10:32 a.m. I could have answered. I did. Across the street, Crumbletech flickered like a dying constellation, while the woman they'd tried to erase finally reclaimed her silence. The cafe had grown louder by late morning, filled with the clatter of mugs and the low hum of chatter. Yet around Mara Ellison, it was as though sound itself had thinned. Her phone still vibrated every few seconds, a ceaseless metallic heartbeat, but she didn't move to stop it. The world that had once dictated her every breath was still calling, still begging for her obedience, and she had never felt more free to ignore it. One call after another. She recognized the rhythm of desperation in the sequence. HR first, then legal, then the board, each one escalating in tone. Then a new number appeared, Eli Turner. For a moment, she hesitated. Eli was Richard. He had been complicit, yes, but not cruel. When she finally answered, his voice came through ragged, stripped of corporate polish. Mara, he said, it's worse than you think. The system isn't just locked out, it's rewriting permissions. Every admin account, every investor terminal gone. I tried to stop it, but it's like it knows. It doesn't know Eli, Mara said softly. It was designed to listen. And to the people who built it. Not the ones who abused it. I told them not to fire you, Eli blurted, voice cracking. I told Richard that removing your credentials would destabilize everything, but he wanted control. Mara sighed. Control's always an illusion, Eli. You just saw what happens when someone tries to own what was never theirs. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his tone was heavier. They'll try to blame you. You know that, right? Legal's already drafting statements. If you come back now, you can defend yourself. I don't need to defend myself, she said. The truth is doing that for me, Mara plays. Don't walk away from this. She smiled faintly, not at him, but at the bitter symmetry of it all. Eli, I'm not walking away. I'm stepping out, she hung up before he could respond. Then with deliberate calm, she opened her notebook, its leather-worn, edges soft from years of sleepless nights, and wrote in bold, even strokes, 9:12 a.m. Oh, they ended my career. 10:04 a.m. Oh, I took it back. She stared at the words for a long moment, the ink still glistening wet. Then she closed the notebook, fastened the strap, and slid it into her bag. For 17 years, her identity had been written in code and deadlines. Now it was written in silence. Mara rose from her seat, the phone still buzzing uselessly beside her cup, and whispered to herself, that's enough. The line was simple. But it felt like a final declaration, the kind that rewrites an entire life. Mara Ellison was halfway to the door when her phone lit up again, another vibration against the table, another voice from the world she had already left behind. She ignored it, slipping her notebook into her bag. But then she saw the caller ID and froze. Zella. Her daughter's name glowed across the screen, bright and unrelenting. She answered immediately. Hey, sweetheart, Mom, the girl's voice was soft, hesitant. Are you coming home tonight? For a moment, Mara couldn't speak. The question cut straight through the noise in her head. The collapsing company, the endless calls, the years she'd spent living in offices instead of rooms with windows. Yes, she said finally, her voice trembling. Oh, yes, baby. I'm coming home. Really, you promise? Mara smiled through the tears gathering in her throat. I promise. I'm already on my way. There was a small sigh on the other end, a kind of fragile relief that only a child could give. Okay. I'll wait for you. We can still do birthday cake tonight. Even if it's late. When the call ended, Mara stood for a long moment in the quiet cafe. Around her, the day continued. Baristas shouting orders, someone laughing too loudly by the counter, the street outside humming with traffic and life. For the first time in years, she realized she wasn't part of the noise. She was outside it. She looked once more through the glass wall toward Crumble Tech. The tower loomed in the distance, still shimmering, still pretending to be indestructible. But now she saw it for what it was, not a monument to progress, but a monument to fear. To control. To everything she had once mistaken for purpose. Her phone buzzed one last time. Richard Vale. Oh, she didn't hesitate. She turned the screen face down, silencing it forever. Then with a quiet exhale, she stepped out into the sunlight. The city air was crisp, alive. She could smell rain somewhere in the distance, the kind that washed everything clean. She crossed the street slowly, no rush in her step, her bag heavy against her shoulder, her heartbeat steady for the first time in years. Freedom, she thought, wasn't about reclaiming what they took. It was about choosing what truly mattered. She whispered it aloud as she walked away from the glass tower, from the ghost of her old self, from the noise. Oh, freedom isn't revenge, she said. It's remembering who you are when the noise finally stops. And with that, Mara Ellison disappeared into the crowd, not defeated, not victorious, but whole.